Sometimes people ask me how I learn and remember theological or philosophical concepts. I think it's a good question because, it's hard to remember that stuff. Theology, to a much lesser extent, philosophy, are not like certain other disciplines where it's very much you have the first principles and it's immediately easy to reach conclusions. Like with mathematics, I don't have to actively remember that 2 plus 2 equals 4. When you have a solid grasp of the way that mathematics works, that's what it is. Again, philosophy is kind of like that. I think philosophy is more difficult than at least the basics of mathematics. Like basic mathematics is much, much easier to just simply work out than basic philosophy in my mind. Because basic philosophy, I think, has a lot more assumptions going in. You have to do a lot more abstraction that people are simply not used to. But with that in mind, I thought, in this video I would cover what I recommend for studying philosophical and theological concepts. I've made videos before as to like what are some books I'd recommend, all that. Seth and I have made a video on that recently. But I think this will be nice because part of the reason I make this channel is so I can help other people learn it. Not simply because I want people to see my knowledge and I want people to watch my videos, but so I can show people, hey, this is what I'm reading and I've gotten a lot out of this stuff, and so you guys should read this too. Because truth be told, I was not always into this stuff. I got into it really like at the way end of high school, pretty much after high school, and then in college is when I got into reading. Like I knew basically nothing, frankly. In college or before college, I was so illiterate, biblically illiterate, philosophically, all of that. So, and now it's been about 6 years of studying and reading this stuff, really like 5.5. So if I can do it, I think other people can. Now, this advice is not necessarily going to be perfect because simply put, it's not going to apply to everybody. Some people are not going to be able to do the things that I do, or it's not the way that you learn. But I think a lot of what I have to say nonetheless holds for most people. Now, with that in mind, first, just returning to, the matter of studying, so to speak, is you have to have the right books in mind. I recently recommended to a friend of mine, or I gave the book Doctrine of Man, the collected writings of Gerhard and Chemnitz on this stuff, to a friend of mine, an evangelical friend, and she told me that it was just amazing. She had never encountered a book that was so just direct, just so straightforward, not necessarily easy to understand, but so straightforward and willing to just talk about the issue immediately. I think that a lot of modern works are just they're rife with just spending tons of time on anecdotes to where they don't actually really get to the issue, and when they get to the issue, it's not very thorough. One of the things that frustrates me about a lot of modern works is that it's not really done in as systematic a way as I would like. So you'll see works that are like, oh, let's defend certain doctrines. Like if you're to defend and describe the doctrine of justification, of sola fide, a lot of the time it's just, let's just examine a few passages in Romans and Galatians, and just say, oh, look, it says be saved by faith, apart from works of the law. And this is at a popular level. I don't see them engaging with like new perspective on Paul and the responses from the Reformation era, the complex ones from, say, Bellarmine and Cajetan and such. I see I see that these works often don't do patristics. I see that they often don't engage with philosophical questions or categorize things in ways that I think are very helpful. Whereas there are some works that are this way, but they're very expensive today. Nonetheless, I think that a lot of the best works on this stuff are, maybe they're really expensive, but they also might just be free in the public domain, but you wouldn't really know about them. So, I think specifically of frankly, the Book of Concord, the Apology. I know a ton of people who were really convinced by Lutheranism by the Apology, the book of Apology, the Augsburg Confession, which is in the Book of Concord. But tons of people just don't know of it. I think that really was one of the works that contributed massively to my conversion to Lutheranism, because it was very well argued and all that. And Melanchthon engages. He cites, I believe he cites Ambrose in there a few times, maybe Augustine. I don't know if he cites others really, but the Book of Concord in general does some citations of this stuff, and it's a really well done theology that doesn't spend its time on these anecdotes that are pointless. Like the large catechism and small catechism, they have their prefaces, which, you know, talk about why the book is written, but I nonetheless think that stuff is actually valuable because it tells you, you know, what's going on at the time and what is the goal of this catechism. Whereas I find a lot of modern works are just like, here's the thing that I did in my life, and it made me realize this. Where it's like, that's fine for a YouTube video or a podcast or something, but I don't think that's it for like an actual thorough defense of a certain theological or philosophical concept. So number one is just have the right materials. You got to read the right stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's not necessarily wrong out there, but it's not as good as you can. As well written or as thorough as it could be. And I think that's what contributes to a lot of people not knowing as much, as they simply pick the wrong words. So watch the videos that Seth and I and I don't know if anybody else is contributing, but we have, you know, made several videos explaining, hey, here are some works you guys should read to understand philosophy and theology from various perspectives. But getting into like the formal aspect of it, which is like the structure of your study, how you do it and all that, this is where I think it really differs person to person, but I think it's valuable for me to go over the way I do things. So one, I am very big about taking notes, and not really the notes actually that you just like write in the book. I actually use like Google Docs, you can use Word or whatever, and I write the notes. Some people even do it on, you know, pencil paper, which I respect, or pen and paper. I respect that. I personally don't, just because I'm faster on a computer and I like having it in the cloud. But the reason I do that is because, one, it forces me to summarize things. I'm not just purely highlighting or underlining something. It forces me to summarize concepts and things that I've read from a book that, you know, if I were just write it kind of in the margin on the paper, then, you know, I'd have to really go search through it to find it, right? Now, I do think there are some books that are easy enough for underlining or highlighting stuff is fine. Like, I don't take notes on like the history of events that are just like, and this happens, and this happens, this happens. I don't try to summarize that stuff. You know, I tend to highlight the important stuff. Yeah, that's fine. But when it comes to conceptual stuff, when it comes, for example, to this one book I'm reading, The Metaphysics of the School, I just straight take notes in a Google Doc because I think that is really helpful for me. And when I take the notes, I tend to do it in like a hierarchical format. So it's not just pure bullet points. It's like you have like your one, and you'll say the overall point, and then you're like A, and then if you go inside A, it'll be like I, you know, or the one but expressed as an I, like in the Roman numerals, you know, and so on. And I think that's really good. I think that's a good way to do it. I also try, you can't always do this for every chapter or even every book, but I also try to sometimes like ask myself questions at the bottom of that chapter's notes. So like, you know, ask myself, do you think this figure is correct here? Or explain this concept that they give. And I do that because it forces me to think again and explain it in my own terms that, you know, sometimes as I'm taking the notes themselves, just writing down, sometimes I'm just frankly, you know, writing out what they're saying in very key terms and, or in frankly the language they practically use alone. Whereas I think I need to get myself to write it in my own way and explain the concept as though I'm explaining to somebody else. So that's what really, really, really helps me. Now, another thing I think everybody should do, and this is where a lot of issues come about, and this is, I've run into this issue myself many times, is be really, really, really careful to make sure you know the terms that are being thrown around. Because, you know, if you read a scholastic and he's talking about matter, the word matter, that's not the way that, you know, I had to move this side. That's not the way that we think of matter today. We don't think of matter scientifically in the same way the scholastics did as potency, effectively. Of course, various scholastics differ on how that looks, with Scotus having some degree of actuality in it, and same with Bonaventure, whereas Aquinas says it's absolutely pure potency. There's no matter, or there's no actuality contained therein. But the point is that, you know, if you just read a work from a scholastic, he's talking about matter and form, and you just walk in with only the scientific definitions that we hold today, you're going to have completely incorrect thoughts. So if you come across a term that you don't know, like you just straight have to look it up. You straight need to look it up. I specifically recommend the Dictionary of Scholastic Philosophy, which is, it's on archive.org, so that's a good sign. It's really good. It's helped me a lot. I think it's really exhaustive. You know, maybe there are a few terms that are not present there, But nonetheless, I think it helps. So, this holds largely both for philosophy and theology, but, I'm spending more time on philosophy because I think it gets more contentious when you get to theology, because it's like, you can talk about, Roman Catholicism versus Eastern Orthodoxy and then general Protestantism. You're going to differ on the definition of justification. But if you're at least aware of the differences in the terms and how they're used in the different traditions, that is going to inform the way you do things, and you're going to have more knowledge of it. And to remember that stuff, I do a few things. One, I will actually reread the notes that I've made previously. So, I'm not perfect at it. I'm not able to do it like every day or something, but I try to reread. Like, I have my chapter notes from a book on the Google Doc, and, I try to reread it from a book I haven't read in a long time, so I can, remember the overall, the important things I got from that book. Because sometimes it's not worth rereading an entire book, right? There are some books that it's like, this thing is so long, and it's so, maybe not difficult, but it's really like heavy in its terms and concepts, where I should just go back and look at my own summary of it. That's what I recommend. It's kind of like what you typically did in like high school or college when you're studying for a final. I don't know too many people some people might have read the entire textbook again, but I just went through my notes again. That's how I did it, and it's really helped me remember things. So that, then for terms, maybe even just straight up make flashcards. Just straight up make flashcards and try to do the quizzes of yourself each day, at least a few. But sometimes you can't do that. I'm not very consistent with it, but it's something that I think is invaluable, and I recommend. And then my final piece of advice is, try to find a way to where you're going to be explaining these concepts. Like, get into a situation where you have to explain these concepts to people. So, I did that through the YouTube channel, right? Like, when I made this channel, it's not only so other people learn, it's so I have to write this stuff, and I can see, I really have to spend more time thinking out this concept. What does it mean? And I often find that as I write scripts, I even learn about these concepts that I thought I knew really, really well. I learn more as I'm writing this stuff. And so, it doesn't have to be a YouTube channel. It doesn't have to be a podcast. It doesn't have to be any of that. As long as you find some medium where you're explaining it to people, I think that really helps. And I think that's really the practice I recommend. It's helped me a lot, as I said. And a lot of other people get stuff out of it. So I think those are my big pieces of advice for studying. And when it comes to remembering stuff, again, reread the notes you make. That's what I do. But also, I don't think you should simply read a single book on the same topic. I think you need to get it consistently, that same topic read a lot. So if you're going to talk about the doctrine of justification, it's not enough in my mind to simply read, say, the Book of Concord on it. Yes, the Augsburg Confession and the Apology, and then of course the stuff in the Formula. There's a lot of stuff in there on justification, no question. But if you just read the Book of Concord one time, you're not going to get the exhaustive discussion of justification, and you're also probably not going to remember too much because you're not having the concept reinforced in you. This is part of the reason that when Lutherans preach, we're consistently, preaching the gospel, is because it's not as though, hey, you have it once, you're fine, you perfectly remember it, and you perfectly, have it applied to you in a way, or subjectively. Not in the sense that there's a certain amount of preaching and then the gospel is effective. Not like that, but if you only receive the gospel once in your life, then it kind of gets diminished in a way, in you. You may forget it, you may lose the importance, but as it's continually re-emphasized, every single day or every single week, you're being renewed in the gospel. And that's the same with these concepts. You need to read this stuff a lot. You need to study it in depth so you can, return to the state of mind you had at the time, at least in terms of your knowledge. I will sometimes re-listen to old videos of me. I recently re-listened to my video on dispensationalism, and as I'm listening to it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Something I just straight forgot because I wrote it about 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago. And so I don't think that you should be comfortable with her, or you should be prepared to simply read one book on a subject, be like, all right, that's it. I think I think some people fall into that error. And then I also should mention, when it comes to biblical texts, how do you study the Bible itself? I really do think, as I said, that like as I've said this before, but I think this is important, or this is just a suggestion. I don't think personally, if you're trying to, like, if you've read the entire Bible already once and you know the general story and all that stuff, if you really want to reinforce everything in the Bible, I think you should be reading from multiple chapters a day from different books. Like, again, kind of like the preaching, or what we have in the divine service. You have the Old Testament reading, you have an epistle reading, and the gospel. I think that's a good practice. Is maybe read a portion or a chapter of each. I think that's good to reinforce that. It's helped me a lot because, I think some people get really stuck reading, say, just the minor prophets. Oh, look, I'm going to read the minor prophets. And they read it forever. And they're just consistently, like, forgetting other things that are important as well. I think having a schedule where you're constantly reading the Gospels, for example, is really, really good for you. So, and anyway, that's overall my suggestions in terms of how you should structure your study. In terms of the actual matter, in terms of the books you should read, we have plenty of videos on that. So just, let me know if you guys have any other thoughts in the comments, or any questions regarding this and any other advice. So thanks for watching.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching another Scholastic Lutherans video. If you'd like to support us, you can follow us on Twitter at Gerhard's Ghost, or contribute on Patreon at Scholastic Lutherans. There you'll get access to our Telegram chat and other perks. Links can be found in the description. Subscribe, like, or leave a comment, and have a nice day.